Welcome to Snail Story. Today, let me share with you the story of a mother of three, running from a painful past and a man who had once lost everything. They made no promises. They simply rebuilt a home with wood, with trust, and with a love that asked for nothing but gave everything. If healing, heartfelt stories are your thing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and come along with me till the very end. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the faded maple leaves, casting a warm and gentle hue across the main street of Brookvale. Callum Hayes adjusted the strap of his tool bag slung over his shoulder as he stepped out of the hardware store. His sun-weathered, calloused hands hardened by over a decade of labor, quickly checked his supplies. Water valve, wrench, rubber tubing. Everything fit neatly within this month's tight budget. He allowed himself a faint smile when he spotted Sammy, his 10-year-old son, waiting on the steps across the street, feet swinging, clutching an old book. "Found something good to read, kiddo?" Callum asked, his voice deep and tinged with weariness. "I borrowed Gulliver's Travels," the librarian said. "It's a classic." Sammy beamed. "I'll read it to you tonight like how you read to me." Callum nodded, his face relaxing just a bit. These moments, simple, peaceful, were the rewards he held on to dearly. Even if life hadn't been easy since his wife passed away, they had barely turned the corner when Callum suddenly stopped. By the side of the store, under the long shadow of a red brick wall, a woman sat huddled with 3 children. Her coat was worn thin, buttons missing. The smallest girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder, shivering. The eldest child had wrapped her arms tightly around her younger brother, her eyes locked onto Callum's wide, deep and aching with a hunger that stopped him cold. Callum meant to walk on. He had enough to worry about. Bills, incomplete jobs, sleepless nights. But those eyes, he turned back and slowly walked toward them. "Are you all right?" he asked, gently. The woman startled, pulling her children close. "We're just resting for a bit." Callum observed her hands thin, slightly trembling as she brushed her daughter's hair. Her clothes weren't warm enough, her shoes caked in mud. But what gripped him wasn't their appearance, it was the way she tried to stay composed, clinging to the last shred of dignity in eyes that had nowhere left to look. "When's the last time you ate?" Callum asked, straight to the point. She hesitated, then, barely audible, "Yesterday. Just some bread." Her voice cracked halfway through, as if one more word might break her completely. He didn't hesitate. "I live just up that hill. It's not a big house, but there's soup on the stove and toast that needs someone to help eat it." The woman stared at him. "Why? Why would you help strangers?" Callum glanced at the children. "Because once, someone helped me when it was just my boy and me, a leaky rental and a battered old suitcase." He held out his hand. "I'm Callum Hayes." She paused, then placed her frail hand in his. The handshake was surprisingly firm. "I'm Marissa Caldwell. This is Olivia Hazel, and our youngest Theo." "Nice to meet you, kids," Callum smiled, nodding at them. "Soup's getting cold." That evening, Callum's kitchen buzzed with more life than it had in years. The old wooden table, once set for 2, now held enough space for 5. The children sat upright, but their eyes never left the steaming pot of soup. "Carrot, beans, and potatoes," Callum said as he ladled a bowl for each of them. "The trick is a long simmer and a dash of fresh basil." Theo dove in, soup smeared around his mouth. Hazel stared at the toast as if it were solid gold. "Slow down, Marissa," gently reminded them. But she too ate fast, like the food might vanish if she didn't. Sammy scooted closer to Olivia. "Dad makes really good toast. Grandpa taught him." "What's the secret?" Hazel mumbled, her mouth full. Callum winked. "Family recipe. Hayes, top secret." Laughter filled the airlight, crisp like the first breeze of autumn, but enough to warm the room. For the first time in days, the children laughed freely, not looking over their shoulders. After dinner, Sammy showed the kids his homemade dinosaur models carved from scrap wood. Callum and Marissa stayed behind, steam curling from their mugs of tea, wrapped in a gentle silence. "Thank you," Marissa whispered. "I'm not used to being helped. Or trusting." "Brookvale's a small town," Callum replied. "Small towns tend to notice people." "Maybe it's just you," she said softly, lifting her gaze to him, eyes still tired, my glinting with the faintest spark of light after a long darkness. Callum didn't answer. In that moment, he simply knew something was beginning. Quietly, slowly, but deep enough to stir what had once been broken inside them both. Night settled gently over the town of Brookvale. The breeze rustled through the maple leaves on the porch, whispering like a distant sigh from someplace far away. Inside Callum's small home, everything had gone quiet. After tiring themselves out playing with Sammy's wooden toys, the children had fallen asleep, curled up on a makeshift mattress in the living room. Sammy had happily given up his room for their new guests, carrying his blanket and pillow to the sofa and drifting into dreams in no time. Marissa stood by the kitchen window, the curtain behind her swaying gently. The moonlight revealed a faint bruise on her left wrist, the one she had instinctively kept covered with her sleeve all evening. "Want some more tea?" Callum's voice came softly from behind. It didn't startle her, she simply nodded. They sat again at the kitchen table, lit only by a dim lamp and 2 steaming cups of herbal tea. Outside, fireflies blinked in and out of sight, like tiny specks of hope in the darkness. "You once said someone helped you when it was just you and your son," Marissa began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened?" Callum stared into his tea for a long moment before replying quietly. "Construction accident, a scaffolding collapse due to faulty design. I noticed the flaw, raised the concern, asked for a recheck, but the project lead didn't want delays. I refused to sign off." He paused, a humorless twist in his smile. 3 days later, I was fired. And not just let go, they blacklisted me. I was removed from every bidding list in the region. Did you sue? Not enough proof? And no money for a lawyer? At the time, my wife had just been diagnosed with early-stage cancer. My priority was keeping a roof over our heads, taking care of her and our son. Marissa said nothing. Callum's expression didn't change much as he spoke, but his hands clenched tightly around the teacup like he was holding on to that memory so it wouldn't shatter him again. She looked up, something flickering behind her eyes, pain, and perhaps a realization. "The man who led that project, what was his name?" Callum looked up. "Derek Caldwell." The color drained from Marissa's face. Her hand trembled, rattling the teacup slightly. She set it down, folded her hands in her lap, and whispered, "He's my husband." The air in the kitchen thickened. Callum didn't speak. The words didn't surprise him, not entirely. It was as if, on some level, he had already sensed it. But it still pierced through the calm he'd tried to keep. Marissa lowered her head. "When I met him, Derek was the perfect man, charming, successful, principled. I was swept off my feet. He changed?" Callum asked, his voice low. "No," she replied, her lips trembling. "I changed. I quit my job. I went from an independent designer to the woman behind the man. At first, it was just feedback, then control. I wasn't allowed to design anything that wasn't up to his level. Couldn't laugh too loudly. Couldn't cook anything he didn't approve of." She swallowed hard, staring at the faint reflection of herself on the table. "And when I pushed back, just a little, his hands changed, too." Callum fell silent. His gaze shifted from pain to fury, not at Marissa, but at men like Derek, who shattered souls with words and hid their fists behind wealth and reputation. "When he first threatened to hit the kids," Marissa continued, her voice small, I knew I couldn't stay. She looked up, then really looked at Callum for the first time since the story began. I know he has power. He has money. Lawyers, connections. But I have my kids. And I had a car with a full tank of gas, so I left. How long ago? Callum asked quietly. For days, Marissa answered. For days and one sleepless night. We've slept at rest stops, avoided cameras, eaten scraps from corner stores. I don't know what I'm doing. I just know I had to go, had to get away. Silence settled again between them. Then Callum spoke, slowly. He's the man who cost me my career, nearly my home. Now, he's the man chasing you and your children. Marissa clenched her hands. I never thought I'd meet someone who knew Derek. Let alone someone this kind. Callum exhaled a long, heavy breath. I can't change the past, but I can choose not to turn my back when someone needs help. For the first time that evening, Marissa smiled. Her face softened. My dad would have called you kind too. A fault. My mom would have said it's a kind of trust that's hard to find. They'd both be right. Callum chuckled lightly. A breeze drifted through the window. The scent of basil from the backyard mingled with the fading aroma of tea. Tomorrow, Marissa said softly, we'll go. I don't want to bring trouble to you and Sammy. Callum shook his head. Brookvale is the one place he won't think to look. It's a small town, yes, but the hearts here are big. You need time to figure out your next step. Stay, at least, until you're ready. Marissa held his gaze now, without hiding. Why would you take that risk? Callum looked toward the room where Sammy slept. Because I've lost everything before. I know that feeling. And I know if no one steps up, it'll never stop. His voice dropped lower. And because I can't stay silent a second time. They sat like that, side by side, in the small kitchen, under dim light and with 2 cooling cups of tea. 2 people once broken, now beginning to rise not through grand promises, but through simple, quiet acts. Behind them, a wind nudged the chime. Hanging by the window, its soft tinkling like the first breath of something being reborn. The first rays of dawn slipped through the kitchen window, painting soft streaks of light across the time-worn tile floor. The scent of toasted bread and weak coffee drifted gently through the rooms, stirring the children still wrapped in their blankets. No shouting, no slamming, no harsh voices. Only the quiet clinking of a spoon against a mug and the soft hum of an old toaster. Marissa stood by the kitchen counter, cradling a mug of peppermint tea, quietly watching Callum prepare breakfast. He hadn't let her lift a finger that morning, simply saying, let the kids sleep a little longer. You should breathe too. How long had it been since she'd seen a man in the kitchen who didn't demand, didn't snap, didn't control, who just quietly did the work, as if kindness was simply ... expected. Can I help set the table, Mom? Olivia, the eldest, asked as she walked in, hair still tousled. Marissa nodded. Start with the tablecloth. It's in the drawer under the cabinet. Callum looked up and smiled at her. Best little sous chef I've ever seen. Olivia blushed and smiled shyly. Hazel and Theo came in next, followed by Sammy. The kitchen buzzed with activity, but not chaos. Everyone had something to do. Breakfast wasn't a rushed survival. Routine. It was a shared moment. Once the table was set, Callum poured milk for the kids and sat down. It's Tuesday, he said. I've got to install a plumbing system at Mr. Leroy's place. But this afternoon, if you kids want, the workshop out back has some extra wood scraps. Who wants to make toys? I want to make a dollhouse. Hazel squealed. I want to make a sailboat. Theo shouted, then quickly covered his mouth, embarrassed. Marissa looked at her children. She could hardly believe that just one peaceful night had brought such brightness to their faces. The fearful eyes from yesterday now sparkled as if they'd never known the darkness. Her throat tightened. After breakfast, Callum headed off to work. Before he left, he said gently, "If you'd like, feel free to take a look at the workshop. I left a few sketch designs on the table. You don't need to do anything. It's just that I remember you studied interior design." Marissa gave a small nod without replying. But when the back door clicked shut, she truly did step outside. Callum's woodshop wasn't large, but it was neat and filled with light. Sunlight streamed through the clear roof panels, casting a soft glow on the orderly shelves and tools arranged with almost ceremonial care. She touched each of the sketches. Callum had left simple pencil drawings of coffee tables, rocking chairs, bookshelves. Each line was honest, rough-hewn, and quietly moving in its sincerity. She stood still for a long moment. That familiar feeling washed over her like she was touching a piece of herself she'd hidden away for years. Back then, she would spend hours in her own studio, designing furniture not for show or status, but simply to bring warmth into a home. She sat down and picked up a pencil. Her hand trembled slightly. 10 minutes, and 30 an hour later, she had 2 new designs: a children's bookshelf with a little rain-covering arch, and a foldable kitchen desk perfect for small spaces. When Callum returned in the afternoon, he found her sitting by the workshop window, still sketching, her hair slightly tousled from the breeze. A faint smile on her lips, one he hadn't seen before. "Sorry," she said, hearing his footsteps. "I couldn't help myself, and you thought I'd be mad?" Callum teased, stepping closer. He looked down at the sketches. "This table, that's clever." "The idea came from my mother's dining table," Marissa said softly. She used to fold it away whenever she turned the house into a tutoring classroom. Callum didn't say anything, but his eyes said plenty, quiet admiration. Dinner that night was simple fried rice, vegetable soup, and honey-glazed apples for dessert. But they ate as if it were a feast. Sammy told stories from his old school. Hazel talked about wanting to be a robotics engineer. Olivia dreamed of being a dance teacher. "And how about you, Theo?" Callum asked. The youngest boy hesitated. I want to fix water pipes, like you." Everyone at the table laughed. Theo turned bright red, then joined in the laughter. After dinner, Marissa washed dishes while Callum handed her the towel. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. "You're not," he replied. "You're someone finding her way backhand that takes a lot of courage." She turned to look at him. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be myself. Today, I remembered, just a little." "Take your time," Callum said. "Here, no one expects you to be anything but yourself." Before bed, the kids crowded around Callum and Sammy, begging for a story. He pulled out the copy of Gulliver's Travels Sammy had borrowed from the library. Under the warm yellow glow of the lamp, Callum's calm voice filled the room, telling of lands of tiny people and grand adventures. Marissa sat by the window, holding a cup of warm tea. For the first time in so long, she allowed herself to believe, maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a stop along the way. Maybe Brookvale was a beginning. The early autumn wind rustled through the old oak trees in front of Callum's house, scattering dry golden leaves across the gravel road. The air had turned crisp, carrying a subtle chill. But inside the little house, the freshly lit stove spread a gentle warmth. Days in Brookvale passed in a strangely peaceful rhythm, so peaceful that Marissa had begun to question it. On a Saturday morning, she took Olivia and Hazel to the bakery near the town square to buy flour and eggs, the ingredients for the pumpkin pie Callum had promised to teach the children to bake. Mrs. Lynn's little shop sat on the corner of the main street, where every customer was greeted by the ring of a bell and a warm smile. "Haven't seen a new face in ages," Mrs. Lynn said as she weighed out the sugar. "Your girls are lovely." Marissa only nodded in thanks. She was still learning how to accept kindness without flinching. As they left the shop, she noticed a strange gaze man in a baseball cap standing next to a black car parked along the road, staring at her. The look wasn't friendly. He didn't smile, didn't avert his gaze when caught. Marissa instinctively pulled her daughters closer, pretended not to notice, and quickly walked toward the end of the street. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, she told Callum about it. "Do you think I'm just being paranoid?" she asked. Callum set down his cup of tea. "I don't think that at all. You've lived with fear long enough to recognize when it comes back." Marissa nodded, eyes distant. "He doesn't let go easily," she said softly. "He once followed me all the way to my office because I was late for a video call." Callum said nothing. He knew something bad was coming, not if, but when. 3 days later, Sammy came bursting into the house, breathless. "Dad, some stranger was asking for directions to our place." They didn't give a name, just asked, "Is the house with the plumber and 4 kids at the end of Maple Hill?" Callum frowned. "Did they follow you?" "No, but something about them felt off." Callum stepped onto the porch and looked around. A strange car sat idling near the edge of town. As soon as he appeared, it revved and drove off. A weight dropped heavily in his chest. That evening, he made a call to an old friend, Sheriff Dale, the town's police chief and one of Callum's former classmates. "We'll keep an eye on unfamiliar license plates in the area," Dale said firmly. "If anything unusual comes up, I'll let you know right away." Callum hung up and turned toward Marissa, who sat pale-faced on the staircase. "I have to go," she whispered. "No," Callum said, shaking his head. "Go where?" "Back to hiding." Running again with 3 children in tow. "This is the one place he hasn't reached yet. But if I stay, you and Sammy will get dragged into it. Have you forgotten?" Callum stepped closer, voice low but resolute. "I already lost everything because of him. If I turn my back now, I'll lose myself too." For the first time, Marissa didn't argue. She simply leaned into his shoulder, her fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt like someone gasping for breath after nearly drowning. The next day, Callum spent the morning reinforcing the windows, adding locks to the back door, and installing simple alarm chimes at each entry point. Marissa didn't stop him. Instead, she quietly prepared 3 emergency bags, a few changes of clothes, important documents, some cash, and dry food. She hid each bag in a different spot in the house. Then she taught the children a new game, hide and seek, with a password. The game was actually an evacuation drill. If a stranger appeared, each child was to run to their assigned hiding place and respond with a password. The moon forgot to sleep to confirm they were safe. Hazel asked, "Mom, is this real, or just pretend?" Marissa hugged her tightly. "It's just a game, but one that helps us protect each other." That night, after everything had quieted down, Callum and Marissa sat on the porch, staring out into the night. The wind was colder than usual, but neither wanted to go inside. "The first day I met you," Marissa said, "I thought you were kind, but maybe a little foolish." Callum chuckled. "You weren't wrong. Now I know that kind of foolishness is exactly what can change a life." He turned to her, eyes soft but contemplative. "I've never once regretted it." Silence settled between them, broken only by the wind brushing across the eaves. But down the street, at the far end of Maple Road, something stirred. A black car, headlights off, crept silently into town like a predator stalking prey. Behind, the dark glass, cold eyes watched, patient, calculating. The ghost from the past had found a trace. Near midnight, a thin veil of mist settled over Brookvale. At the end of Maple Road, the little house stood quietly like any other night, with only the rustling of wind through leaves and the gentle creak of wood on the porch inside. The children were fast asleep, each cuddling a small pillow sewn by hand. Marissa dozed off in a chair by the window, moonlight glinting softly in her hair. Callum, as usual, stayed up late, checking the wiring in the workshop out back. A gust of wind rose, sharper than before. Then a faint click. The latch of the workshop door had moved. Callum looked up, stepping quickly toward the back door. As soon as he opened it, a sharp, acrid smell hit him in the face. Smoke, thick. Pitch-black smoke billowed from the workshop, the same workshop where just yesterday he and Marissa had sketched designs for their first shared project. Fire. Raging, merciless. Callum shouted, "Marissa." Footsteps pounded inside the house. Marissa rushed out, trembling, eyes wide. "The kids. Get them out." "Through the front door," Callum ordered, before turning back toward the flames. The fire had already spread to the porch roof. Dry. Wood caught flame like paper. Callum wrapped his jacket around his face and grabbed the fire extinguisher, spraying straight into the blaze, but it wasn't enough. The strong stench of gasoline clung to the air. This wasn't an accident. Hazel's scream tore through the night, a sound that twisted the heart. "I'm stuck," she cried. "The door won't open." Callum didn't hesitate. He tossed the extinguisher aside and slammed his shoulder into the bedroom door. Flames had begun licking up the wooden walls. Once, twice, the door burst open. Smoke choked the room. Hazel stood frozen, trembling, her face streaked with tears. "Come here." Callum barked, then scooped her into his arms, covering her head with his jacket and charging through the hallway. Marissa stood on the front porch, clutching Olivia and Theo, her face ashen. He set Hazel down, barely catching his breath when Olivia screamed, "Sammy, he's not out yet." Callum's heart clenched. "He's not in bed," Marissa cried. He didn't need to hear more. He spun and ran back inside, ignoring Marissa's desperate scream behind him. Smoke had swallowed the corridor. Callum dropped to the floor, crawling low, coughing and shouting, "Sammy, answer me, son." A faint whimper came from the storage room, the tiny door where Sammy kept his half-finished wooden toys. Callum threw it open. Sammy was curled up behind a paint can, face smudged with soot, eyes brimming with fear. "Dad," the boy whimpered. I'm scared," Callum pulled him close to his chest. "It's okay. I'm here now. Close your eyes. Breathe through my nose, all right." He wrapped the boy in his coat and bolted for the back door, now almost entirely consumed by flames. Then a thunderous blast. The workshop's fuel reserve exploded. The shockwave threw both father and son to the ground. Marissa screamed from the front, running to them as Callum staggered up, back scorched, shoulder bleeding. But the whole family, everyone was out. Behind them, the house surrendered to the flames. 10 minutes later, the town's fire truck arrived. But it was too late. All they could do was hose the charred ruins to keep the fire from spreading to the neighbors. Sheriff Dale was there too, his face grim. "Callum, are you okay?" he asked, voice tight. "The kids are safe," Callum whispered, then collapsed. Callum awoke in the hospital 3 days later. White ceiling, the steady beep of a heart monitor. His back and shoulder were tightly bandaged, burning as if the fire still clung to him. Marissa sat by his bedside, eyes shadowed with fatigue, holding his hand tightly. "The kids," he croaked. "Safe," she said, with a trembling smile. "They're staying with the neighbors for now. But they've come to see you every day." Callum gave a slight nod. "The house, gone," she said, her voice shaking. But everything that truly mattered got out in time. A tear slipped down onto his hand. "I used to think I didn't deserve a place to call home anymore," she whispered. "But that night, when you ran into the fire, I knew she didn't finish. She didn't need to." Callum understood that evening. Sheriff Dale arrived with a manila envelope. "We found solid evidence," he said. There were traces of accelerant, unusual boot prints around the workshop, and the bakery's street camera caught a man in a hood driving the same black car we've seen before. "It's him," Marissa said quietly. Dale nodded. "We'll protect you. And Callum, the whole town's behind you." As night fell, Callum looked out the hospital window, watching the moon drift silently across the sky. Beside him, Marissa had fallen asleep, still holding his hand. The fire had taken their home, but not their hope, not their quiet, growing belief that they could rebuild from something deeper than timber or brick, something forged in courage, in choices, and in a love that was rising slowly, steadily like light after the longest night. For days after the fire, Callum Hayes was discharged from the hospital. He stepped out of Sheriff Dale's truck with his back still wrapped in bandages. His gait slow and stiff, but his eyes were steady again, just like before. The small wooden cabin at the edge of town, once a summer home for a large family, had become their temporary shelter. The people of Brookvale had cleaned it from top to bottom, furnished it with the basics, and even hung a hand-embroidered quilt in the center of the living room. On it were the words, "Family isn't always blood, it's the people who choose to stay." The door swung open before Callum could knock. Sammy ran to him, wrapping his thin but steady arms around his father. "Dad!" the boy choked out. "I thought I'm here," Callum said, gently ruffling his son's hair, wincing at the movement. "And I'm not going anywhere." Behind Sammy came three little faces as Olivia, Hazel, and Theo, all beaming at him with joy. Marissa stood at the back, her face frozen in emotion. "Careful with your shoulder," she murmured, helping him inside. The cabin was small, but warm. Wicker chairs donated by neighbors, an old porcelain dish set from the diner down the street, a bookshelf full of comic books, and even an old radio. Each item whispered, "You are not alone." That first night in the cabin, after the kids had fallen asleep, Marissa placed an envelope on the table. "This is your portion of the equipment insurance," she said. Sheriff Dale helped file a temporary claim, and here's the new design. Callum took the sketch and nodded slowly. "I think we should place the windows facing south," he said. "Morning light will fill the new workshop and the kids' rooms." She asked, "This time we'll build 4 separate corners, but with connecting doors. They don't need to hide anymore. They deserve a place to belong." Marissa paused at his words. Then she whispered, "You don't know this, but that phrase, 'a place to belong,' I never believed it existed. Not until I stepped into your kitchen." Callum smiled. They didn't need to say anything more. The next morning, the town began rebuilding, not just a home, but Faith. Mr. Leroy, the retired man down the road, arrived with a wheelbarrow full of stones. "Use the backyard for the new workshop foundation, Callum." Mrs. Lynn from the bakery delivered ingredients each morning with a handwritten note. "For the bravest people I've ever known." Even the kids pitched in. Sammy helped with measurements. Olivia chose wall colors. Hazel organized the books. And Theo tightened screws, though they often came loose again shortly after. "I'm helping," Theo shouted, sweat beading on his nose. "Helping is the best thing," Callum said, ruffling the boy's hair. A week later, Sheriff Dale returned to the cabin, holding a thick folder. "He's left the state," Dale said. "We can't charge him. There's no direct evidence. But he knows now. He's no longer welcome in Brookvale." Marissa nodded, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. "What about the assets?" He froze. She asked. "His lawyer sent a settlement offer," Dale replied. "He's agreed to transfer the assets insurance payout for the house, compensation for the destroyed tools, and education funds for the kids on one condition, that he never has to see any of you again." Marissa gave a small, bitter smile, not from joy, but irony. The man who once made her disappear was now paying to keep her away. She looked at Callum. "What do you think?" "I think it's a victory, but not because of the money." "Then why?" "Because he doesn't get to control anything anymore." That afternoon, as the sun softened and the air turned golden, Callum sat sketching the floor plan for the new workshop. Marissa sat beside him, refining a few lines with gentle strokes. "You know," she said, "back when I was still studying design, I used to dream of opening a little shop one that sold simple wooden furniture, with big glass windows facing the street." "What was it called?" he asked. She smiled. "I never gave it a name." Callum thought for a moment, then murmured, "How about hearth and grain? Warmth and wood grain. Steady and enduring." Marissa looked at him, her eyes touched with gold. "From the fading light, that's not just the name of a store. That's you." Callum smiled, but said nothing. Instead, he reached out and gently placed his hand over hers for the first time. With no hesitation, the touch was light as the breeze, yet deep as a foundation, something that would hold them steady no matter what storm came next. The crisp morning wind of late autumn slipped through the kitchen door left ajar. Callum was brewing coffee when Marissa walked in, holding a large envelope just delivered from the post office. Her eyes lingered on it, as if facing something painfully. Familia past fear, dressed in new clothing. "Derek's lawyer," she said softly, placing the envelope on the table. Her voice no longer trembled like before, but it still held caution. Callum picked it up and opened it carefully. A court summons, a petition to transfer custody of the 3 children, Olivia, Hazel, and Theo Caldwell. Reason: unsafe living conditions, unlawful residence, and psychological risk to minors. Attached were a series of photo shots from street corners, images of the cabin, even a picture of Callum carrying Theo during the fire. Marissa clenched her fists. "He's been watching us this whole time. Even when we thought he was gone." Callum was silent for a moment. Then he slowly pushed the documents aside. "All right, then this time, we don't run." That afternoon, Callum visited Sheriff Dale's office and met with Mayor Annie Coleman, a woman in her 60s. Tough and direct as the granite hills around Brookvale. "We need witnesses," Callum said. "We need this town to stand up." Mayor Coleman smiled. "You think we've been quiet all this time out of fear? No, we were waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it." 3 days later, Brookvale went into battle mode, not with anger, but with paperwork, testimonies, and truth. Mrs. Lynn from the bakery submitted a statement about the children's behavior in her shop. Mr. Leroy, their neighbor at the cabin, handed over a journal documenting the children's laughter. Day by day, Mr. Henry, the craft teacher, testified to Hazel and Theo's remarkable progress since moving to town. Even Emma, Olivia's best friend, wrote a letter in careful handwriting. "Olivia smiles more since she lived with Mr. Callum. I don't want her to cry again." The first custody hearing was held at the county courthouse. Derek didn't show up. He sent his private lawyer instead. The man looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. Charcoal gray suit, calm tone, every word meant to discredit Marissa. "My client is willing to cover all expenses for upbringing, education, and light therapy if needed. The condition that the children be returned to an environment more fitting of their status." Callum clenched his fists under the table. Marissa exhaled and slowly stood. "I once lived in that environment," she said, her voice eerily calm. "But my 3 children lived in fear, in silence and confusion. They don't need silk sheets. They need the freedom to laugh." Derek's lawyer smirked. "You have no stable income, no property, no husband, and you're living with a man who is not their biological father." Before Marissa could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "Mayor Coleman. She has a whole town." The courtroom turned. The back rows were filled with Brookvale residents, Mr. Leroy, Mr. Henry, the elementary school principal, and nearly 30 others. They hadn't been summoned. They came because the truth mattered. The hearings stretched across several days. Eventually, Derek did appear wearing the face of a man used to winning. But he hadn't expected that this time. Marissa no longer bowed her head when his lawyer presented the photo of the burned-down workshop. Marissa quietly held up a drawing Theo had made, a small wooden house with 6 people inside and a scribbled line underneath, "Home is where someone saved me from the fire." The courtroom fell silent. Over a week later, the ruling came. Custody was granted to Marissa Caldwell. Derek Caldwell was allowed supervised visitation, no more than twice a month, with no private contact. Financial support would follow state minimum guidelines with no special privileges. Derek's lawyer looked stunned. Derek himself said nothing. His face stiffened, frozen as if, for the first time, power had been taken from him by the very thing he'd always dismissed, kindness, as. They stepped outside the courthouse. Marissa paused at the stairs and turned to Callum. "I used to be afraid no one would ever believe me, but today I'm not afraid anymore." Callum didn't say anything, simply reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. The children came running from the back row, throwing their arms around their mother. Olivia kissed her cheek, Hazel clung to her sleeve, and Theo whispered, "So we don't have to leave again, right, Mom?" Marissa knelt down and held all 3 close, nodding, "No, sweetheart, we're not going anywhere. This is our home now." Winter came slowly to Brookvale. The early days of December passed with just enough chill for visible breaths. Yet the morning sun still cast a soft light across rooftops and gardens. Callum's new home was gradually taking shape on the same plot of land once nothing but ashes and charred beams. Now it echoed with the laughter of workers, the rhythmic pounding of nails, and the scent of cinnamon waffles from the temporary kitchen set up in the cabin. Marissa stood by the window, holding the new workshop design, the blueprint she and Callum had redrawn from scratch after staying up past midnight, sipping chamomile tea and debating which direction brought in the best morning light for the workspace. "I still think your desk should face the big window," she said as Callum walked in, brushing snow off his jacket. "And I think you should officially put your desk there too," he replied, his voice low and warm. She looked up. "What do you mean?" This workshop isn't just mine anymore. It's been a long time since I carved wood or sanded in silence. You're here, and you should stay." Marissa didn't answer right away. She glanced out the window, watching Olivia and Sammy gather stones to line the new garden path. "You know," she said slowly, "there was a time I thought I'd never design anything again, that all my sketches were meaningless, shallow. Derek made me believe that." Callum remained quiet, letting her continue. "But now when I hold a pencil, my hands don't shake anymore. Because no one's beside me trying to control every line. I don't design to impress anyone. I design to build something real for people who need a place to call home." She turned to face him fully, her gaze steady. "And I want to start that with you." Callum said nothing. He simply stepped closer and rested his hand gently on her shoulder. Not an embrace, not a bold gesture, just enough to say, "I'm here. And I'm not leaving." That afternoon, they cut the first piece of wood together for the new home's dining table, their first project since everything had changed. "I used to make tables for 2. Callum chuckled. "Then 3 when Sammy started eating solids. This time 6 chairs, and you're designing the tabletop." Marissa studied the wood grain and chose a plank with a swirling knot in the corner. "Someone once told me knots were imperfections. But I think they're what make a table tell a story. Like us." Callum teased. Marissa laughed. "No, we're worse. We're an entire yard of miscut lumber." Callum laughed to a laugh that came easily, with no guard, no distance. That night, after putting the kids to bed, they sat on the porch as snowflakes drifted past the maple trees. Marissa wrapped herself in the half-finished scarf Callum had started knitting the previous Christmas. "I've never knitted for anyone before," she admitted. "But I used to embroider my name onto table linens. Maybe it's time I practice again." Callum looked at her for a long moment. "Marissa, you know," she turned to him, waiting. "I don't just want to build a house with 6 rooms and a wood shop. I want to build a life with you, the kids, laughter in the kitchen, and nights spent reworking designs until way past bedtime." Marissa bit her lip. The wind stung her eyes, but the tears weren't from cold. "You don't have to answer now," Callum said softly. "But if you think this home should have one more key holder, I'll make another copy." Marissa leaned, her head on his shoulder. "You don't need a copy. No, because I'm not planning on leaving." The next morning, Brookvale woke to a quiet but joyful announcement. Hearth and Grain Woodworks was reopening this time, with 2 founders. The small opening celebration, Mayor Coleman gave a short speech. A house may burn to the ground, but a real home of the kind people choose to rebuild together cannot be destroyed. The kids handed out fresh-baked pastries. Hazel wore an apron and played receptionist. Theo proudly introduced himself to customers as, "I'm the official chair tester." As golden sunlight bathed the rooftops in the distance, Callum and Marissa stood on the workshop steps, watching guests leave with small samples in hand. "I think I can really do this," Marissa whispered, her hand slipping into his. Callum nodded. "We will do this. 1 chair, 1 meal. 1 evening of laughter at a time." Snow began falling softly that morning, dusting the cabin roof in a layer of white as light as powdered sugar. Brookvale settled into its holiday hush, colorful lights strung from porches to tree trunks outside the small chapel in the town square. But inside the Hearth and Grain workshop, the atmosphere was more alive than ever. Marissa stood at her workbench, carefully cutting leather for a new armchair design. Nearby, Callum was planing a large oak slab, prepping it for the next order. Between them were the sounds of wood knocking, sanding machines humming, in the cheerful voices of children playing production team. In the back corner of the shop, "Be careful with that chair." "Theo," Sammy called, "that's the throne." For our client in Seattle, Theo snapped a salute. "Yes, sir, Chief of Quality Control." Marissa laughed. "We should really make them name tags." "And pay them in waffles," Callum added. Neither of them said it out loud, but both felt it deeply. They weren't just building furniture. They were building a real family, piece by piece, day by day. That afternoon, just after a simple lunch, a sleek SUV pulled up in front of the workshop. A woman stepped out in a long coat, holding a leather briefcase and a thick envelope. "Hello," she said warmly. "I'm Lauren Gentry, representative of the Nest and Home Journal from New York, a top-tier interiors magazine." Callum and Marissa exchanged a glance. "Slightly stunned, we came across your work through a post by a traveler. She bought a chair from the Brookvale Fair last month. That customer, by the way, is the daughter of legendary designer Henry Cosgrove." Lauren opened the envelope and handed over a glossy proposal. "Hearth and Grain, contemporary craftsmanship in the heart of small-town America. We'd like to feature your workshop in our New Year's edition and place. It's a special order, 15 dining sets for a coastal restaurant chain launching in Florida." Marissa nearly choked. "Did you say Florida?" "That's right. This is a major opportunity for your brand." Callum said nothing yet. He took the proposal, his eyes scanning phrases like scaling operations, hiring additional staff, and nationwide shipping. "We'll think about it and get back to you in 3 days," Marissa said, polite but composed. That night, after the Kids fell asleep tired from decorating the Christmas tree. Callum and Marissa sat at the tea table, hands still sticky with glitter glue from Hazel's DIY ornament masterpiece. "What do you think?" Callum asked. Marissa sighed. "Part of me wants to say yes immediately. More income, recognition, a career step forward. But," Callum prompted gently, "but another part is afraid of losing what makes this us, the slow pace." The kids laughing in the workshop, and quiet nights like this. Callum nodded. "I feel the same. I've chased approval before and lost everything. But this what we've built it came from our hands and from the heart of someone beside me." Marissa looked at him. He continued, voice soft like wind through pine. "I've been thinking about this for a while, whether to wait a few more months, till the house was finished. But I realized I don't need anything else to know what I want." From his coat pocket, Callum pulled out a small wooden box hand-carved, no hinges, with a twist-top lid. Inside was a wooden ring, rimmed with scorched steel from a nail salvaged after last year's fire. At its center was a tiny clear stone, a diamond but glass, melted and reshaped. "Found by Olivia after the fire. I'm not asking you just to make things official," he said gently. "I'm asking because if you choose to stay, we'll walk this whole road together, not just as partners in work, but as a true family." His voice was low, warm, and steady like every plank he'd ever sanded smooth. "Marissa Caldwell, will you be my companion in this craft and in this life?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at the rings, small, imperfect, and full of every mile they'd walked together, through fire, through hesitation, through morning teas, in quiet peace. At last she smiled and placed her hand over his. "I don't need to try it on," she said softly. "I know it fits, just like we fit." The next morning, Marissa and Callum emailed Lauren Gentry. They declined the large-scale order but agreed to the magazine feature. On one condition, the article must highlight their values of craftsmanship, family, and community. Lauren agreed. Marissa turned to Callum. "We don't have to choose between growing and being true to ourselves. We just have to remember why we started." Callum nodded. "And now we can start building the house not just with wood, but with commitment." Callum and Marissa's wedding took place at the end of March, just as the last patches of snow melted beneath the spring sun. Brookvale bloomed after its long winter. Fabric flags hung across town. Free waffles were handed out at Mrs. Len's. Bakery and children ran about clutching daffodils in their little hands. No formal invitations had been sent. Yet the entire town showed up. Because everyone knew this wasn't just an event, it was a reward. For resilience, for kindness, and for those who dared to believe in each other again. The ceremony was held right on the land in front of their new home, the home they built from ashes, from revised sketches, and from their own hands. The front yard had become a small garden planted by Sammy and Hazel. Grass just beginning to sprout, and wooden benches crafted from salvaged beams left over from the fire. "Where's the bride?" Olivia called out, twirling in her puffy white dress as the proud honorary bridesmaid. "I'm coming." Marissa shouted back from behind the house, holding a bouquet gathered by the children. The flowers weren't perfectly arranged, but they were vibrant, just like their life together. Callum stood waiting in a simple gray shirt. Beside him, Sheriff Dale acted as efficient. He'd refused to wear a suit, saying, "I'm a neighbor, not a priest." As Marissa walked forward, Callum didn't look at her dress or the flowers. He looked into her eyes. The same light he had seen the very first time when she stood in the rain shielding her children in front of the hardware store. Sheriff Dale said a few brief words, then held up a small wooden plaque that read, "Family isn't where you're born, it's where you're chosen to be loved." "Callum Hayes," he began, "do you choose this woman to build a home with not one of walls and roofs, but of trust, kindness, and companionship?" Callum smiled, eyes slightly red. "I chose her a long time ago. Today, I'm just putting it into words. Marisa Caldwell. Dale turned to her. Do you choose this man not to be sheltered, but to walk beside him, to build and to live? Marisa took Callum's hand. I choose him not because he saved me, but because he let me stand on my own. Applause broke out. The kids ran up and threw their arms around the couple. Theo shouted, I'm the little best man. Even though no one had given him that title, they celebrated with grilled meats, garden salad, and homemade apple pie. There were no instruments, but Mrs. Lynn sang. Mr. Leroy played the harmonica, and 52 neighbors clapped along. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Callum and Marisa sat under the porch, gazing at the promise tree, a young maple they had planted that morning with the children. Beneath it, they had buried a small wooden box. Inside were a slip of paper labeled the day we met, a charred piece of wood from the old workshop, the first draft of the hearth and grain blueprint, and Hazel's hand-drawn card. Dad Callum plus Mom Rissa equals home due. You think the tree will grow? Mara said, her hand in his. It will, Callum said. Because it's not rooted in soil, it's rooted in what we believe. Months passed. Hearth and grain continued its steady rhythms, small in scale, unchanged in soul. They didn't take mass orders, only custom pieces, wedding gifts, anniversary benches, or rocking chairs for the elderly. Marisa opened a tiny design nook in the shop, a healing corner, where she created pieces for survivors of abuse, chairs for those who once feared sitting too long, desks for children rediscovering a sense of safety. Callum kept doing what he did best, quietly building things that lasted not just in the shop, but in people's hearts. The children grew. Sammy fell in love with engineering and studied mechanical design. Olivia became a painter. Hazel told wonderful stories, and Theo remained the household's self-declared head of quality control. Their home now had walls covered in drawings, warm wooden floors, a kitchen always filled with tea, and a porch that never closed its door to anyone in need. One quiet evening, as Marisa adjusted a reading lamp and Callum scribbled notes for an upcoming order, she looked over and smiled. You know, she said, I used to think happiness meant big things, recognition, money, prestige, and now? Callum asked. Now I think happiness is switching on a reading lamp each night, knowing someone's there fixing the bulb beside you, not with words, just with presence. Callum squeezed her hand. I think that's what home is, and it was. Their home wasn't the place they were born. It was the place they had built together, one brick, one chisel, one scar, one laugh at a time, until it became a place called family. Thank you for listening to today's story. We hope you found a bit of warmth, a bit of faith that a true home is sometimes built from the simplest things. If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe to Snail Story, and leave a comment sharing how you feel. We'd love to hear from you.